I'm going to read to you from Isaiah chapter 64. Isaiah 64, verse 1 through 9. If only you would tear open the heavens and come down, mountains would quake before you, like fire igniting brushwood or making water boil. If you would make your name known to your enemies, the nation would tremble in your presence. When you accomplished wonders beyond all our expectations, when you came down, mountains quaked before you. From ancient times, no one has heard, no ear has perceived, no eye has seen any God but you, who acts on behalf of those who wait for him. You look after those who gladly do right. They will praise you for your ways, but you were angry when we sinned. You hid yourself when we did wrong. We have all become like the unclean. All our righteous deeds are like a menstrual rag. All of us wither like a leaf. Our sins, like the wind, carry us away. No one calls on your name. No one bothers to hold on to you. For you have hidden yourself from us and have handed us over to our sin. But now, Lord, you are our Father. We're the clay, and you are the potter. All of us are the work of your hand. Don't rage so furiously, Lord. Don't hold our sins against us forever, but gaze now on your people, all of us. This is our text today. I explained to you that every week I don't have a choice. I don't choose these texts. These texts are offered in the wisdom and the tradition of the church. For centuries, people are reading the same text. Actually, lectionary calendar is built the way that it cycles through sets of texts every 3 years. It's divided year A, B, and C. We are on year B, and this is the first Sunday or first weekend of the Advent season. And something that these texts are prepared to do, and it's always been confusing to me, why are we talking about Advent? Aren't we supposed to be talking about it every week? We're fortunate enough as Adventists, it's in our name, so we're reminded of Advent, but not so with other churches and other traditions. And so it was noticed that people tried to prepare themselves for Christmas. And as you know, Christmas is the time when people get busy and you feel more overwhelmed. Everybody I know gets busy and busier. And in that sort of commotion of things, people lose the focus. People lose the touch of what it means to celebrate Christmas. So I wonder if that was the reason why these particular readings are focused not as much, or kind of does both in a very Jewish kind of fashion, that it's really about the first coming, but it's actually about the second coming as well. And as you listen to this text, you sometimes get confused. Are we talking about the second coming or the first coming? And the answer is yes. And maybe that we don't miss the aspect of Christmas that sometimes so important for us not to lose. We get to celebrate Christmas as if we become, for just 4 weeks, we become Jewish. We now feel a little bit like people who find themselves living in a very strange circumstances, adverse circumstances. I don't have to go on and on. We've been repeating that every year, that year 2020 has been the strangest thing. And I'm surprised that we didn't hear anybody predicting that the end of the world on 2020. And people try to predict the end of the world from as long as we could remember it. First big date was, of course, year 1000 after Christ, and nothing happened then. And then Martin Luther called Pope Antichrist, and he expected Jesus to come soon because of the Antichrist and the descriptions in the book of Revelation. Then, of course, came people who became known as Millerites. Later they became Sabbatarian Adventists, and later you know them as Seventh-day Adventists. William Miller predicted and calculated based on Daniel chapter 8. He calculated that Jesus was 2,300 days of the prophecy of Daniel was supposed to fall in the year 1843. That did not happen. They did adjustment calculation because Miller realized that he needed to shift 1 year because there is no such thing as year of zero. That was the year before Christ, and then was the first year after Christ. So BC AD, there's no year of zero. So I said, okay, I made a mistake. It should be 1844. Of course, nothing happened in 1844. Then someone who was was connected in the beginning of his ministry, Charles, the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses. My mind is blanking today. What's his name? Charles Stays. It will come to me. He, of course, predicted the year of the end of the world on 1914. And people try to predict it somehow. That was so needed to talk about the end of times because, of course, that creates the sense of urgency and somehow stirs the people. So the lectionary season anticipates that. And without breaking the sort of direction that Jesus gave us not to try to predict the year and time, first Christians decided, how about instead of being worried about Jesus coming on a certain date and a certain year, maybe we should focus on that every year and talk about it for 4 weeks. So this is the time that roughly by our calendar goes after Thanksgiving, before Christmas. We talk about Advent. And as I said, we listen to Advent, or we participate, we worship, we read the text of Advent, and it gives us a chance for this month to become Jewish. I know some of us are more Jewish than others, right, to hear family, yeah. And I actually ordered an ancestry kit. I get so jealous that my wife clearly says 50% Jewish. I'm hoping maybe I have some, but I doubt it. I think, if anything, I'll find like 50% of some Mongolian blood in me. That's what I'm afraid is going to happen. So we get to become Jewish because we find ourselves in the circumstances when the world that we live in, we really don't like. And not because we just that kind of people that don't like and complain all the time. Even when it's good, it's still not good. We complain about something. We always find to complain. Seems like our national Jewish kind of tradition to complain about things. But this is objectively tough time when you are occupied by Roman Empire. And we have this sort of romantic view of Rome, and we travel and we see these ancient statues and things. But the things that Romans were doing, sometimes even the worst atrocities created by Hitler and Stalin in the 20th century, people will scratch their head comparing to what Romans were doing. They were just brutal force, brutal people. And people say, well, we like our Romans nice and idealized, like very nice looking, very masculine soldiers going into armies, showing the great examples of military tactics. But Romans were really brutal people who did not, it was not uncommon for those who rebel against them, they would wipe out the cities and villages. Just to understand what happened to Jerusalem and how Romans marched, as soon as there was a revolt in Jerusalem in the year 72, 73, they marched into Jerusalem and they burned down the temple. They destroyed it completely, and to make even the point stronger, they brought a pig in the temple as well there. They did not like people, and Jews live in that reality. In addition to that, they have a local king who, really not a Jew. His name is Herod. And if you think the Romans are bad, Herod is much worse. Herod is Herod was known for even killing his own son because they thought that he was threatening with the power. So in Rome, And people in Rome who were brutal themselves were scratching their head and thinking, the joke was, it's better to be Herod's pet, Herod's dog than Herod's child. So this is the kind of people, not only they get Rome, then on top they get the kind of ruler that we would only can compare to, as I said, Hitler or Stalin or the worst kind of dictators that lived. And he's so much, it's all about Herod and narcissism of Herod building the name for himself. So all of this now, the time that we imagine, and we're reading this text and the passage from Isaiah, imagine that you continue to read, continue to return, and you hear these words that something is about to happen. And how different it is from us who kind of prepare for Christmas, that we already know how it's going to end and what's going to happen. But just for a moment, if we can, I mean, it's hard to do, it's almost impossible to do, but just for a moment, if we can imagine that we don't know that December 24th is coming. And we're just expecting and we're hoping that something is going to happen. For us, Christmas would not be the same. We're so used to celebrating Christmas, to getting really, really busy, and then we go into Christmas and we decorate. And by the way, Rachel, you're my hero. Thank you so much. I just come in and say, people's just creativity is so stunning. Just to take a little, like a woodshop table, turn it upside down, and it becomes a manger. Thank you. So I just needed something, because we're obviously outside and there's not much in there, and this just makes me feel I'm not sure why Jesus is away from me, but it's okay. I like. Can I turn it around so I can see Jesus? Oh. Maybe you can see Jesus as well. We like baby Jesus. It makes us feel so nice and cozy, and we sing songs, and we celebrate Christmas. And I've noticed that Christmas for us became the opportunity to kind of maybe even escape from reality for a little bit. Just forget about it. Everything is just magic night, and we sing the songs that Jesus just laying in the manger, and no crying he makes, just all the little newborn children. They just lay there and do nothing. They don't cry, they don't poop, they don't do any of that. It's just so peaceful. For us, we escape. We like to think of Christmas, just helps us to sort of travel into a different world. And somehow, maybe it's just me, but it feels like we turn Christmas into a fairy tale that helps us to escape the reality. And this is the difference between us celebrating Christmas and Jews who understand they don't have the sentimental, sort of romanticized view of the Messiah coming into the world. And this is the sentiment that we start getting and start feeling, that for them, Messiah coming would not be on a peaceful night when there are no sounds and the angels singing. For them, Messiah coming would be, as Isaiah writes down, the sky, the heavens would be tear up, and the mountains will quake. The earth will shake. This is going to be the event that stirs us, it changes everything. Because God will do what God does. And God is going to move with the power and the strength. And the mountains that and the whole earth, everything is going to feel like a trampoline, and the mountains going to be jumping like a sugar high children in the sky zone. This is the idea of the Messiah coming. There's nothing peaceful about it. Why? I think because they're so tired of waiting. And that waiting for God who does what God does. Isaiah 64 comes to us at the end of this lament, or what they call just sort of complaint and a prayer of confession. The setting goes another few centuries way back when Israel was occupied by Babylon. And as you know, this is not fun to be under Romans. It was even worse under Babylon. And they were that captivity, not only they were captured, they were all moved from their land. So Jews are now sitting in Babylon and looking, and they realize, what is this? This is not my people. This is not my culture. This is not where we wanted to be. We cannot be free. We cannot worship. We cannot do any of those things. And I can understand why they start getting a little angry. Sometimes in the Western culture, we like everything to be nice. We like to keep everything nice, everything polite. We don't want to offend anybody. But if you live in Babylon, I think it's very normal and human just to get angry, get mad. And they get mad, of course, at Babylonians. Then they get mad at themselves, and then they get mad at God. So this anger that seeps through this text, it's understandable. And of course, they would like God to do something about it. And this is interwoven into the Jewish tradition. To be angry with God is okay. It's somehow, I'm not finding any text that God says, don't be angry with me. It almost feels like God says, it's okay to be angry. God has a broad shoulder and say what you want to say, speak. Because if you have something to be upset about, say it out loud. Speak up to me. Isaiah say, we are so sick and tired of living in this reality when we are oppressed, God. Because we have to live by the rules that we despise. We are forced to do things that we don't want to do. We are not given a chance to be who we want to be, who we are born to be Jewish. We are constantly frustrated with every day of our lives. In other words, imagine, and the best way to compare their situation is to our year 2020. When we wake up every day, we see more people getting sick, we see more restrictions, we see more political turmoil. We haven't even scratched the surface what the economic impact is going to be, what the international impact is going to be. There's wars about to explode anywhere around the world. There was a huge war that we didn't talk much about between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It's a territory of former Soviet Union. We didn't hear much about it, but do understand that tens of thousands of people were killed in just within 2 months since September 27. Just in 2 months, tens of thousands of people killed in the war over the territory and the confusion that goes back all the way to the beginning of the 20th century. All of this happening right now. So imagine Israel living like this, not 1 year, 2020, but year after year after year. So Isaiah, relating this message to God in his speech, says, we're sick and tired. We can no longer hang on to this. We can no longer do this, God. Can this please end? I already started seeing the cartoons about the year 2021. And one of them depicted a bunch of people standing around the corner with a long broom, and the door on one of the doors says 2021, and people with the long broom try to open it and see what happens, because we thought the year 2020 was bad. We don't know what 2021 might bring us. We're really scared to step. But what if we imagine that's going to be 2021, 22, 23, and just like that for another 70 years? What would we say? How would we react? And I don't know, comparing to what could have come to my mind, this seems like a very nice, actually very reserved reaction. So when Isaiah talks about returning of the Messiah, he used the language of so-called apocalyptic literature. It brings the idea of the end of time. And say, why would you want to start to talk about the end of time? And it's very simple. Because if you live year after year like we lived in 2020, you might say, you know what, God, may it just come to the end. Because horrible end is better than endless horror. So the end of time conversation does not come, and for us who lived in the privileged places, who lived, especially when we live in California, it feels like, well, we don't mind. All we want a God, all we want Messiah to come in and fix things a little bit, just to do a little facelift, just to do a little makeover here. We can fix a little bit that, a little bit this. We have a little rotten wood right there. We're going to replace this. We're going to fix this. We're going to paint this over. And we're just going to continue like this. But the year like 2020 reminds us why people have been looking to the end. And the message of the Advent brings this idea that the end is very near. This is what Seventh-day Adventists has been preaching and living since roughly 1844 and officially from 1863. The end is near, but the end is not the end. Something new, something begins, something different. In the Gospel of Mark is a very different gospel. Mark does not spend a lot of time on the nativity. All this conversation, Jesus being born, he lets Luke handle it, and Matthew, there's no shepherds, there's no beautiful song of Mary. Mark just cuts to the chase. Messiah was born, and that's his mission. What Mark is more interested in what happens on the cross than he's interested in what's happening in the beginning. Because Mark is interested in the end of times. Mark, writing this first gospel, he realizes that the people are looking for answers. And the answers now in the reality of the possibilities that Christ opened up, and things are getting worse in the Roman Empire. What is about to happen? Mark writes to the Christians who are sick and tired of the reality of Rome. He's sick and tired of being dismissed by Jews. And now it seems like they're being spread, they're being persecuted, and the message, and the people don't have a freedom to worship and congregate together. So all of this happening at the same time. Mark writes this, and he quotes Jesus referring to the end of times and making it very, very real. Mark chapter 13, in those days after the suffering of that time, the sun will become dark and the moon won't give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then they will see the human one coming in the clouds with great power and splendor. Then he will send the angels and gather together his chosen people from the four corners of the earth, from the end of the earth to the end of heaven. The description of the end of time, according to Mark, is not a romantic picture. It's this violent shaking, is violent change. It's not a facelift. It's not even an extreme makeover. It's a complete reversal of the creation. As the sun and the moon shuts down, and the skies and the stars are falling from the sky, and the dark and the chaos again take over, and out of that God rebuilds something new. The end is really the new beginning in Jesus' words. So this is something to look forward to. But the reality is, in the years like this, we're reminded of the imminence of the end. The end is coming. To embrace the end, to look at the reality of the end, what kind of questions we ask? What do we look? I don't know how this year has been for you. For us, I'm nothing really, I can't say that it's been really, really bad. But every time when this sort of unknown is happening and you don't know what's going to happen even tomorrow, it always throws me back. And Julie and I, we kind of talked about how interesting, we can't choose the times we live in. And this is what happened to us. So I was born in one country that fell apart, and all the values and everything else changed in front of me. So I switched from one world into another without even moving. Sitting in my own bedroom, the world completely shifted on me. And then we came to the United States, and we thought now the life is always something that, I told you a few times, the first time I walked into a little convenience store and in Canyon Lake, I just started laughing because we came from Russia in the middle of 90s, and there was like, the store shelves were completely empty. And I walked into the store, and there's like 50 different types of tea you can buy. And not to mention other things. And I'm just standing there, and it's a little tiny grocery store. It was just a shock. So the world has shifted, and we say, okay, now I'm going to enjoy a new life. The life that is nice, everybody's nice, and you're safe. And we applied for our citizenship in July. Oh, this is citizenship. No, I think it was our green cards that we applied in July of the year 2001. And then 2 months later, I still remember exactly where I was, on the Barton Road, right there, living in the apartments. My senior pastor, Bob Villanueva, called me and said, you better turn on TV now. Because his son, who was Green Beret, Army Green Beret, serving in Germany at the time, was calling him from Germany. They found out even earlier. So you better turn on your TV. And in real life, we were watching the second tower going down in front of us. And the world shifted again. And never the same. And now year 2020. I'm not sure how many of the shifts I can take anymore. And I'm really getting to whatever is next, and it seems like it's getting worse and more profound. Thinking about the shift and the change, it throws me back to, I think it was about 1990. As my friends and I were walking around in the streets of my hometown of Odessa. Odessa used to be a very Jewish city. 30% of population of Odessa at the beginning of the 20th century was Jewish. So imagine every third person on the street is Jewish. Should be easy for you today because all of us are a little bit Jewish today, right? So look around, we're all Jewish right now. Let's pretend. But there was probably only a few places, maybe in the Middle East, where the culture and the society would show such anti-Semitic sentiments than it was in the former Soviet Union. So for the longest time, especially after the, I've never heard, I mean, we heard about Jews and the stories that were heard, but there was never sort of a systemic kind of story, and only people who would talk about it were Jews themselves. But after Israel announced independence in 1948, everything in Soviet Union turned against Israel. There was systemic anti-Semitism, because to be a Jew was something embarrassing, to be something, immediately Soviet Union aligned itself with the Palestine. I'm going to start some, you guys don't see me like walking, I don't want you to walk out of the service like this, Tommy, because of this thing. To be Jewish in the former Soviet Union was really a challenge. You couldn't get certain jobs, you couldn't get education. Somehow people were getting jobs in education, but to work at that it was much, much harder. The things got even worse after 1967, after 7-Day War, when a lot of Jewish people from the former Soviet Union wanted to go and live in Israel, and they were not allowed to. They were shut down, and they would write open letters to Brezhnev, who was the General Secretary of a Communist Party, to say, why can't we be Jewish? Why can't we be allowed to eat the food we like to eat, watch dance the way we dance, to worship the way we worship, to marry who we want to marry? Why can I go back and live in Israel? And they were not allowed, because under the communism, you're supposed to look over the cultural differences, even the nationalistic difference. Of course, we being people, we remain, and our sense of identity and nationalism still exists. We can't just take it out. But the Soviet Union, everything was under the mat. So as soon as Soviet Union fell apart, all these regional wars collapsed, and one of those wars between Azerbaijan and Armenia is still going today. After 30 years, people going at each other. That's how deep this sort of racial difference are. The reason I'm telling you about the hardships of being Jewish in the former Soviet Union is because at that particular day, I don't remember what day it was. I think it was spring. I remember it started getting warm. My friends and I, we stumbled in one of the most beautiful theaters in my hometown. Was rented, and all of a sudden we saw outside a bunch of men standing in the big hats, black coats, and they have what's the English word for side hair? They're not sideburns, sideways, right? But in Russian we call them pesy. It's because according to the book of Leviticus, you're not supposed to shave the side of your beard. So the Hasidic Jews, they grow the hair and then they curl it like this. I mean, this is I've never seen anything like this. I was standing there, so we wanted to kind of get closer, and we walked inside. For some reason, nobody was guarding the door. And I saw a group of this man. I think most of them were men. No, I think I met my friend, my classmate that I didn't even know she was Jewish. So I met there. It was sort of a first open and loud gathering, Jewish, religious gathering of Jews in my hometown. And one, I don't know, most respected rabbi, because when he got up to preach, I think I shared it with you. He got up to the pulpit, and he was a short guy. I mean, I don't think he was even 5 feet tall. But when he got up to the podium to preach, all you could see a hat, the thing, and the white knuckles on the pulpit. I didn't see his face. And he started to speak. He got up and he just goes, way. And the whole auditorium just explodes because that pain, that imagine for the first time in decades, you were allowed to be who you are. And you come to be, and you can relax. You don't have to hide. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to work. You don't have to do anything. You can just be who you want to be. Jews were not allowed to do that for longest time, neither in Russia before the revolution, nor in the Soviet Union. And this rabbi, I don't remember exactly verbatim. I mean, I wasn't even a Christian yet. We were just the first cultural experience. But I remember looking and realizing what is happening here. He's standing and he says, we all know how hard it's been. And when he says it's hard, I mean, it was hell. A lot of people who were sitting there still remember the Holocaust. And he looked around and he said, but the question that I want to ask today, and of course we're going to celebrate that we're first allowed to do this openly. But the question that a lot of us ask is, where was God all this time? Where was God when we suffered through so much? He said it's a good question to ask, and there will be time and place to ask that question. But the question I want to ask today, not where God's been all this time, but the question is, he says, when I look around, is where are all those who are supposed to be here, who's still alive? The question is not what's going to happen to those who never lived to this moment to see us openly worshiping. But the question is, are those who are alive right now, why they are not here? Why, when we can do this, there's someone else? And he says that the hope for us is that when the Messiah comes, the Mashiach comes, there will be no, and this is exact words I remember, he said there will be not a single stupid enough Jew not to come and meet the Messiah. They were still expecting Messiah to come. This expectation of the Messiah for them was not the question of God is going to come and fix things around. That was not even the question, even shall we consider what factors or what arguments. And for Jew is, if you are a Jew, you should be expecting Messiah to come. And this lament that continues through the times, we see reflected in a reading that we had early in Psalm 80. Shepherd of Israel, listen. You, the one who leads Joseph as if he were a sheep. You are enthroned upon the winged heavenly creatures. Show yourself before Ephraim, Benjamin, and Manasseh. Those are the leaders of Israelites' tribe. Wake up your power. Come to save us. Restore us, God. Make your face shine so that we can be saved. Lord God of heavenly forces, how long will you fume against your people's prayer? You fed them bread made of tears. You've given them tears to drink 3 times over. You've put us at odds with our neighbors. Our enemies make fun of us. Restore us, God of heavenly forces. Make your face shine so that we can be saved. When I read these words of Psalm 80, I think we all have become a little bit Jewish after year 2020. And we cry for help and to say, God, can you end please this? Can you come and restore us? Yes, we messed up. We confess we've not been the best, but please come have mercy on us. God, please do something. Isaiah responds to this prayer in the similar words, this opening line of chapter 64. If only you would, God, tear open the heavens and come down. Mountains would quake before you like the fire igniting brushwood or making water boil. If you would make your name known to your enemies, the nations would tremble in your presence. In your presence, O God. When the Messiah comes, the mountains start jumping around like tennis balls thrown on a court. This is not a nice, as I said, a peaceful image. This is a storm. Because it did not meant to fix things or rearrange things around. It meant to bring something completely new. To dismantle everything we've done. Everything we feel is so dear to us. To dismantle the structures, the things, the way we live, the geography, the social structures, the divisions we created. It meant to undo all of that. It's a complete tear down and building back up. It's a terrible thing, but when you're tired, when you're exhausted, when day after day only bad news comes to you, that seems like a good news. The end can be good news. But the message of the Advent can be probably come to one sentence, to one idea. So as we prepare for the end, we're already realizing that this is only the beginning, but also we realize that in this waiting time, that the only way we can think of ourselves, the only way that allows us to do day after day, that we are people of God. And the message and the cry and the lament, and this is why God sometimes discourages us even to argue with Him, because when we come to God and we say, God, what are you doing? Why don't you come and be with us, help us? This is might not be the best of the theologies. This is not the best way to think about God. This is putting God in a box, making God to do what we want God to do. But the idea is God is going to do what God does. But for us, we understand we can't see ourselves being anybody else without you, God. And as Israel, as bad as Israel got through its history, and the things and the atrocious things that have been done, and the injustice has been created, they're the first one who would confess it and pray about it. Says, God, we really messed up. One thing that Israel never allowed itself to think without God, to think of themselves, to be. That's the only identity they had, to be the people of God. That's why that old Jewish rabbi standing there with the tears running down his cheeks, saying, this is an amazing moment, but where are the rest of us? Because we are people of God. This is our identity. So, as we prepare to celebrate Christmas, we ask this simple question: who are we? Before when we get to the actual manger, before we get to the angels singing, before we get into all of this, who are we? Who we identify ourselves as? How do we see God? How we see ourselves in God? One of my favorite poets happened to be also of a Jewish descent. We said goodbye to him a little bit over 4 years ago. On November 7, 2016, Leonard Cohen died. But his song Anthem continues to move me, and every time I hear it, that image of Isaiah and the tearing down the heaven, making this opening in heaven, that image comes to me. I'm not going to torture you with my reading of all of the song, but the chorus, no pun intended, rings the bell. Rings the bell. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Through our brokenness, through our imperfection, through the hurt, through the brokenness of economic system, through the brokenness of justice, through the brokenness of the health system, through our brokenness of our own health, through our own personal spiritual brokenness, we can say, this has been terrible. Or we can see it as God opening the heaven for us. And in the midst of human in the midst of human brokenness, comes this light. And this is what Advent is, to realize, to embrace, instead of try to use Christmas to escape from our brokenness, from the turmoils of our lives. We embrace who we are. And the year 2020 helps us to see in many different ways things that we're missing or lacking, things that we would like to have. And our question to God is not, please fix us here. If God just helped us to put a little bit more hospitals, it will resolve this sort of racial issue. If we can all get a good enough paycheck, we all can find the jobs, things would get better, and they're not. As long as people have been trying to predict the end of times, people have been trying to fix this world themselves, and they cannot. There may be Advent celebration, and Christmas is a reminder that we cannot fix ourselves. And no matter how many years ago we tried to do it ourselves, we cannot. And we've been tried for a while. We've been tried 5 years ago, or 50 years ago, 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago. We tried and we work, we advance our technology, we advance our knowledge. We multiply knowledge like the geometrical progression. In the last 50 years, I think people have done and achieved a lot more than in the previous entire human history. And this is done, and we are multiplying knowledge. Last year, we had the chance to go to Switzerland and to be in the CERN Institute, where they collide the protons, where they split atoms, and the scientists sitting there working 3 shifts, 24/7. They're sending and colliding protons, and I asked them, and what's the point of this? Do you know what the point? Any physicists here? I know there's a physics major here. You know what's the point of that? Because it's cool. And they discover new particles. But I ask you a question, are we better? Do we feel happier today that we could do that or not? We know so much, we achieved so much. We can send the people to orbit the earth. We can send people to the moon, and I'm sure we'll soon be able to send people to Mars. But are we any closer to heaven by doing this? Did we get even the fraction of an inch closer to heaven by being able to pierce the sky? What we're doing today with all this technology, with all of the things, is basically a modern version of building a Tower of Babel. Because Tower of Babel is this bottom-up attempt to crack the heaven open by ourselves. And we failed miserably. And no matter how much we try, no matter how much we roll up our sleeves, we're not getting any closer to heaven. And the good news of the Advent, as we realize that how helpless we are, but we realize that our power and our strength and our ability to overcome is not based on us, on our ability, but in the simple fact that God chose to tear up the heaven and enter, and not enter in a specific, secluded, isolated, exclusive, gated community. God came and was born unto the cracked open sky under the star in Bethlehem, in the thick of the human brokenness. At the very birth, he was already chased to be murdered. And the newborn people, young boys who were born at the time of Jesus, Herod was trying to resolve the issue, were all slaughtered. In the thick of this, in the midst of that mess, Jesus is born. And in that vulnerability, and that love for others and a rejection of self, and that self-sacrifice subverted the powers of Rome. Because we always think of the power or the change that we would like through exercising to physical force, and now we like to scream a lot, and we'll do it not even hiding behind the computer screen, and the kind of rhetoric. There's so much toxicity that comes because that's how we want to get what we want through the means that we find available. But the way of Jesus was completely opposite of that. And Jesus subverts Rome, subverts the most powerful of the empires, subverts the most, and breaks down and takes down. It was said that it was Christianity that took down Rome eventually. Apostle Paul in the 1 Corinthians chapter 1, this is another text that offered for our Advent season, says this. 1 Corinthians 1, 4, 5, and 9. I thank my God always for you because of God's grace. He's talking about to you, Jewish people. God's grace that was given to you in Christ Jesus. That is, you were made rich through Him in everything, in all your communication and every kind of knowledge. God is faithful, and you were called by Him to partnership with His Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. That partnership that we think with Jesus is not the kind of partnership when the thing goes like we start a business together. There's nothing I can do to help myself. This is the partnership that Isaiah finishes with, that picture of partnership. Did you catch that in the very famous song we sing? That Jesus says our partnership, God, is like this. We're the clay, and you're the potter. This is the partnership between the potter, between the clay and the potter. And in that kind of partnership, when a master, with all the creative and skilled hands, take this gooey, grayish, reddish, whatever color the clay is, and start spinning it and putting a force and making it very, very uncomfortable. And it feels awful. It feels like you're forced. But at the end, out of this dark mess comes something very beautiful. And what used to be the lump of dirt now became something beautiful, a vase, or any kind of creation. No matter how powerful we feel, no matter how popular or presentable, human beings cannot do this. clay cannot fix itself. There's been lately a lot of debate in our society and who's going to be in charge. Or those who will be in charge, who are they going to be? In fact, as far as I know, we're still not quite 100% formal on who's in charge. Who's in charge? The powerful? The rich? Who's in charge? The popular? And I think Advent reminds us that it's not human popularity, power, or presentability that shows us and leads us to the resolution. But it is God's power, God's mercy, God's grace that cracks the heaven open, and we see that light. And our end, or what seems like the end, becomes the beginning with the new heaven and the new earth. And all of a sudden, the true gifts of Christmas become not the things we package for each other, even if we got a good deal. The true gift of Christmas becomes the new heaven and the new earth. And it's given to all of us. So Advent leaves us with the same question I heard 30 years ago, listening to the old rabbi. The question is not what happened to this moment. The question is not where God's been all this time and how come He didn't do what we want Him to do. God is going to do what God does. The question is not what God should do about us. But the question is, what God, or what we're going to do about God. What should we do about God, who is the only one? So the Advent, we begin with this simple message from Isaiah, echoed by Paul and Mark in Psalm 80. That the question is not, shall we bring God into our lives? The question is, how can we live on and continue if God does not become all of our lives? Amen.